The air in Cedar Grove, Oregon, carried the sharp scent of salt and fir trees, a clean, raw aroma that did little to clear the memories Ethan Cole was trying to escape. A soft, persistent mist clung to the coastline, blurring the line between the restless sea and the heavy sky. For a Navy SEAL on a rare 30-day leave, this quiet, moody town was meant to be a refuge. Ethan, a man built of quiet intensity, walked with a purpose that seemed out of place on the sleepy main street. His features were sharp, carved by sun and stress. He was trying to slow his pace, but years of training had wired him to notice everything. It was that ingrained awareness that made him stop. Ahead, outside a modest building with a faded sign, reading Cedar Grove Animal Clinic, a scene was unfolding that shattered the town's peaceful atmosphere. A young man in his early 20s stood, with arrogant posture that his expensive city clothes couldn't support. This was Bryce Thorne. His face was twisted in a sneer of pure entitlement. Facing him was a woman whose stance mixed defiance with weariness. Dr. Maya Scott, the town veterinarian, had her chestnut hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. In her late 20s, her face usually held kindness, but now showed fierce protective resolve. Between them stood a magnificent German shepherd. The dog, Ranger, wasn't barking aggressively but stood firm, a low warning rumble vibrating in his chest. His posture was a clear message, this far and no further. "I'm not going to tell you again, Scott." Bryce's voice cut through the damp air. "My father made a generous offer. This entire block is coming down, and your little clinic isn't going to stand in the way of progress." Maya crossed her arms, her jaw set. "This isn't just a clinic, Bryce. It was my father's before me, and it's not for sale. Now I've asked you to leave my property." Bryce laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "My father is trying to turn this dying town into something special, and you're standing in the way because of sentimentality." He took a threatening step forward. Ranger mirrored the movement, planting his paws more firmly. The rumble in his chest grew louder. "Get that mutt under control before I do it for you," Bryce snarled, his eyes fixing on the dog with pure malice. "He is under control," Maya shot back, her hand resting reassuringly on Ranger's powerful shoulders. "He just doesn't like bullies." That was a spark. Bryce's entire demeanor shifted from arrogant condescension to raw anger. The insult had hit its mark. "You think you're clever?" he spat. He lunged forward, not at Maya but at the dog. His boot swung out in a vicious, unexpected kick that caught Ranger hard in the ribs. The dog yelped, a sharp cry of pain and surprise, stumbling sideways. For Ethan, the world snapped into focus. The mist, the distant gulls, the scent of the sea, it all faded away. There was only the threat and the target. He had seen senseless cruelty in war zones across the globe, but seeing it here, on a quiet street against a defenseless animal, ignited a cold, controlled fury within him. He moved. There was no sound, no warning. One moment he was a bystander 30 feet away. The next, he was a silent force of nature. Bryce was still snarling at the wounded dog when a hand clamped down on his shoulder. It wasn't just a grab. It was an anchor, rooting him to the spot with impossible weight. Bryce spun around, his face a mass of fury. "Who the hell are—" His words died in his throat. He was looking at Ethan, whose expression was utterly calm, but whose eyes held a depth of danger Bryce's sheltered life had never prepared him for. "You need to leave," Ethan said. His voice was low, devoid of emotion, yet it carried more authority than a shout. Bryce, fueled by ego, tried to shake off the grip. It was like trying to shrug off a mountain. Ethan's fingers didn't tighten. They simply held, a demonstration of effortless power. "Get your hands off me. Do you know who my father is?" "I don't care," Ethan replied, his voice still level. He applied subtle pressure to a nerve point in Bryce's shoulder. It wasn't enough to cause serious pain, just a sudden, shocking weakness that made Bryce's knees buckle slightly. "You laid your hands on her dog. You will not do it again. You will turn around, and you will walk away. Now!" Humiliation and fear fought in Bryce's eyes. He had built his identity on his father's power, but that name was useless here. He was facing something primal, something he didn't understand. Defeated, he spat on the ground near Ethan's feet. "This isn't over. My father will hear about this." Ethan released him. The sudden freedom made Bryce stumble back. With one last hateful glare at Maya and a nervous glance at Ethan, he turned and stalked off down the empty street, his expensive jacket looking ridiculous on his retreating frame. From a parked sedan down the street, a silent observer watched him go, then made a quiet phone call. The sudden silence felt heavy. Ethan's focus immediately shifted. The ice in his eyes melted, replaced by calm concern. He turned to Maya, who was kneeling beside Ranger, her hands gently running over his side. The dog was whining softly, favoring his left front leg. "Is he okay?" Ethan asked, his voice now gentle. Maya looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and gratitude. She hadn't even seen where he had come from. I think so. He took a hard hit. I need to get him inside to check for broken ribs." She tried to help Ranger to his feet, but the dog whimpered and struggled to put weight on his leg. "Here," Ethan said, kneeling beside her. "Let me." He spoke softly to the dog, letting Ranger sniff the back of his hand. There was an innate understanding in his movements, a quiet confidence that animals seemed to sense. Ranger, despite his pain, looked at Ethan and gave a small lick to his fingers. "Okay, boy," Ethan murmured. "Let's get you looked at." With practiced ease that surprised Maya, Ethan carefully maneuvered his arms under the large dog, supported his weight and lifting him as if he were a fraction of his size. He stood, holding the 75-pound German shepherd securely against his chest. Maya scrambled to her feet and rushed to open the clinic door, the little bell above it chiming softly. "This way. The exam room is just to the left." Ethan carried Ranger inside, into a space that smelled of antiseptic, clean linens, and the faint, comforting scent of animals. He gently placed the dog on the cool steel of the examination table. Ranger immediately looked to Maya, his tail giving a weak, uncertain thump against the metal. Maya's professionalism took over. Her hands moved with practiced skill as she began her examination, her focus entirely on her dog. "Thank you," she said without looking up. "I don't know what I would have. He just came out of nowhere." "He's a bully," Ethan said simply, watching from the doorway, giving them space. "They count on people being afraid to step in." She looked up from palpating Ranger's ribs, meeting his eyes for the first time without the filter of adrenaline. Still, not many would have, especially not against a thorn. She paused, her hand still on her loyal friend. "I'm Maya Scott." "Ethan Cole," he replied. A moment of understanding passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the violence that had just shattered the peace of their afternoon. Outside, the cedar grove mist thickened, wrapping the small clinic in a shroud of gray, hiding it from the world. But both of them knew the threat hadn't vanished. It had only retreated into the fog, waiting. 2 days passed. The persistent coastal drizzle finally broke, allowing a pale, watery sunlight to filter through the clouds, making the wet streets of Cedar Grove gleam. For Ethan, the quiet had become a low hum of anticipation. His leave was meant to be an exercise in decompression, but his instincts, honed by years operating in dangerous environments, were now fully awake. He found himself walking the short distance from his rented beachfront cabin to the veterinary clinic each morning under the pretense of checking on the town's newest patient. He pushed open the door, the familiar bell announcing his arrival. The clinic was quiet, the mid-morning lull between emergency calls and scheduled appointments. Maya was at the front desk, typing notes into a computer, a frown of concentration on her face. She looked tired. There were faint shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. At the sound of the bell, a deep, happy woof echoed from the back. A moment later, Ranger limped into the reception area, his tail wagging in a wide, hopeful arc. He was still tender, but the pained yelp was gone, replaced by an enthusiastic welcome. He nudged his head firmly into Ethan's hand, leaning his weight against his leg in a gesture of complete trust. "Looks like someone's feeling better," Ethan said, scratching the dog behind the ears. Maya's frown softened into a genuine smile as she watched them. "He's a fast healer. The bruising is going down, and thankfully nothing was broken, just deep tissue trauma." She rose from her chair. "Can I get you some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "I'd like that." Ethan accepted, following her into a small break room behind the counter. The space was cozy and lived in, a stark contrast to the sterile examination rooms. Photos were taped to the refrigerator. A younger Maya with her parents, various smiling clients with their pets, and dozens of pictures of Ranger as a clumsy, adorable puppy. She handed him a heavy ceramic mug. You don't have to keep checking on him, you know, but thank you. It's nice to know someone has our back. It's no trouble, Ethan said, leaning against the counter. My cabin gets quiet. He decided to probe gently as they moved back into the exam room where Ranger was resting. I had breakfast at the diner on the pier this morning. Spoke to the owner. Maya's expression became guarded as she continued checking Ranger's bandages. Silas. That's the one, Ethan confirmed. He recalled the man clearly. Silas Croft, a man in his 70s with hands as gnarled as old rope and eyes that seemed to watch decades of tides come and go. He ran the town's unofficial information hub with quiet, observant wisdom. Silas has a lot of opinions, Maya said carefully, focusing on her work. He said Michael Thorne is changing this town. Ethan continued, watching her reaction, that his company, Aegis Development, is buying up the whole waterfront. Some people think it's progress. Silas called an invasion. Maya let out a long, weary sigh, the fight momentarily draining from her. She finished with Ranger and leaned against the counter, her mug cradled in her hands. Silas is right. It is an invasion, a slow, methodical one. She finally opened up, her voice low and steady. This clinic, it was my dad's. He built it himself, board by board, 30 years ago. He was the only vet in this town for most of that time. When he passed away 2 years ago, I took over. It's all I have left of him. It's my legacy. Her eyes drifted toward the photos visible from the break room. Michael Thorne showed up about a year ago. At first, it was all smiles and promises. He wanted to revitalize Cedar Grove, build a luxury resort, bring in tourist money. A lot of folks bought into it. He made generous offers, and one by one, the other businesses on this block sold. The bait shop, the old cannery office, the bookshop, all gone. But you didn't sell, Ethan stated. I couldn't, she said, her voice tightening. He offered me 3 times what this place is worth. I said no. Then the offer stopped, and the problem started. What kind of problems? Subtle things at first. Anonymous complaints filed with the county about sanitation. Even though my clinic has a perfect record, a building inspector showing up, claiming there are code violations in a building that has stood for 3 decades without a single issue. My main medical supplier suddenly terminated our contract. No explanation given. I had to scramble to find another 100 miles away. It's death by 1,000 cuts. He's trying to make it impossible for me to stay in business, to force me out. Ethan listened, his expression unreadable. He had seen these tactics before in different countries, on a much larger scale. It was a form of siege warfare, designed to break an opponent's will without firing a shot. And Bryce, he asked. Maya's gaze hardened. Bryce is his father's blunt instrument. Whenever Michael wants to send a clearer message, he sends a son. Bryce has been here 6 times, each time more arrogant than the last. But he never got physical before. She looked past Ethan, her eyes finding Ranger, who was now lying on the cool tile floor, watching them intently. That wasn't just Bryce being a spoiled brat, throwing a tantrum. Ethan, kicking my dog right in front of my clinic in broad daylight, that was a message. It was a warning straight from his father. A silence settled over the room, thick with the weight of her words. Ethan took a slow sip of his coffee. The warmth of the mug did little to ward off the chill that had entered the conversation. He had come to Cedar Grove seeking peace, a temporary escape from a world of calculated violence and hidden threats. But it seemed that world had followed him here, hiding behind a face of progress and a developer's smile. He looked from Maya's determined, tired face to the loyal dog resting on the floor. His 30-day leave was no longer about rest. It was about to become a mission. As he left the clinic, he noticed the same dark sedan from 2 days ago parked further down the street, its engine now running. The night pressed in on Cedar Grove, heavy and starless. A thick blanket of fog rolled in from the Pacific, swallowing the moonlight and muffling the sound of distant waves. It was a night for secrets, for things that thrived in the damp and dark. Inside the clinic, Maya Scott locked the front door, the familiar click of the deadbolt doing little to soothe the unease in her heart. Ranger lay on his bed behind the counter, his head on his paws, but his eyes were open and alert. He watched Maya's every move, sensing her anxiety, every creak of the old building. Every scuttling sound from the alley outside made his ears twitch. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, stroking his head. "We're safe in here." She didn't know how wrong she was. Hours later, long after the last light in town had been extinguished, a dark SUV with its headlights off crept to a stop down the street. 3 figures emerged, moving with the clumsy swagger of young men trying to project a toughness they didn't possess. Bryce Thorne led the way, a crowbar clutched in his hand. His 2 companions were shadows, their faces obscured by hoodies, their purpose clear only in their silent malice. There was no sound at first, just a faint scrape of metal against a window lock. They slipped into the alley beside the clinic. The first crash was the loudest, the sound of the back window shattering, glass falling like sharp, crystalline rain onto the supply room floor. Ranger was on his feet in an instant, a deep, ferocious bark ripping through the silence. The figures inside froze, but Bryce just laughed, a low, cruel sound. "He's locked in the front. Come on." They moved with vindictive purpose. This wasn't a robbery. It was a violation. They overturned shelves of medical supplies, smashed equipment, and ripped open bags of pet food, scattering the contents across the floor. But their true message was delivered in spray paint on the clean white wall of the main exam room. They scrawled in dripping red letters, "Sell or burn," and on the front door a more personal, vicious threat. "Next time it's a dog." They were gone as silently as they had come, melting back into the fog-choked night, leaving behind a scene of calculated chaos. The next morning, the sun fought a losing battle with the fog. Maya arrived at her usual time, her coffee mug in hand. She saw it from the street, the hateful red letters scrawled across her front door. Her breath caught, her stomach twisting into a cold knot. For a moment, she was frozen, unable to move. Then fear was eclipsed by a wave of protective fury for the animal inside. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking, and rushed in. Ranger. He met her in the trash reception area, whining and pressing against her, unhurt but deeply agitated by the invasion of his home. Maya knelt, hugging him tightly, her eyes taking the wreckage. The overturned furniture, the scattered files, the acrid smell of spray paint. It was worse than she had imagined. This was meant to break her. Tears of anger and helplessness welled in her eyes, and for the first time since her father's passing, she felt truly alone and utterly defeated. That's when the bell above the door chimed softly. Ethan stood there, taking in the scene with an unnerving stillness. He had been on his morning walk when he saw the graffiti. His eyes swept over the destruction, missing nothing. His face was a mask of cold control, but inside, the quiet fury from days ago had ignited into a raging inferno. This was no longer civilian matter. This was an enemy action. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and steady, cutting through her panic. She looked up, swiping at her tears with the back of her hand. I'm fine. Ranger's fine. But this..." Her voice broke. "What am I supposed to do, Ethan? The sheriff will file a report, and nothing will happen. Michael Thorne owns this whole town." Ethan walked further into the room, his boots crunching softly on spilled kibble. He knelt and ran a hand over Ranger's back, calming the dog with his steady presence. Then he stood and looked at Maya. In that moment, she saw the shift. The quiet man on leave was gone. In his place was a soldier, an operator whose eyes held the cold, clear certainty of a man with a mission. "You're not going to do anything," he said. "You're going to let me make a phone call. Then you're going to board up that back window and clean up what you can. You're going to open your clinic tomorrow like nothing happened. You're going to show them they can't scare you." "But they have scared me," she whispered. "I know," he said, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second. "That's why I'm going to handle it." He walked to the corner of the room, away from the broken glass, and pulled out a satellite phone, a rugged piece of equipment that looked completely out of place in the small-town clinic. He dialed a number from memory. After 2 rings, a gravelly voice answered with a single word. Go. Vance. It's Cole. There was a pause on the other end. Commander Elias Eli Vance was a man who had seen and heard everything. In his 50s, with a mind as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel and the patience of a sniper, he was a strategic head of Ethan's SEAL team. He trusted his men implicitly, especially Cole. You're on leave, Ethan. Don't tell me you found trouble in a fishing town. Trouble found me, Ethan corrected. I need a workup on a person of interest. Name is Michael Thorne, operating out of Cedar Grove, Oregon. Company name is Aegis Development. Looks like a standard corporate land grab, but the tactics are getting aggressive. I need to know who he really is. Aggressive how? Threats, intimidation, and, as of tonight, property destruction and targeted animal cruelty. There was another pause, longer this time. Vance knew what those words meant to a man like Ethan. You think it's more than just business? His son attacked a civilian. I intervened. They retaliated against a property under the cover of darkness. They're cowards, but they're organized. It doesn't feel right. I need to know what's under the rock. All right, Ethan. Vance's tone shifted. The full weight of his command was behind his next words. Give me what you have. I'll task the analysts. You'll have a preliminary brief by sundown. And Ethan, stay smart. You're operating solo. Always am, Ethan replied, and ended the call. He turned back to Maya. The entire conversation had taken less than 90 seconds, but the atmosphere of the room had changed completely. Hope, fragile but real, began to push back against her despair. She didn't understand who he had called or what it meant, but she understood the quiet promise in his eyes. He was not just a kind stranger, he was a protector, and the storm that Michael Thorne had brought to her doorstep was about to meet a hurricane. Sundown bled across the horizon in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange. Ethan stood on the porch of his small rental cabin, watching the waves crash against the shore. He had spent the day with Maya, helping her board up the broken window and clean the hateful red paint from her walls. They had worked in a comfortable, focused silence, a shared purpose binding them closer than words ever could. Now, as darkness gathered, the waiting began. His satellite phone, a lifeline to a world far from this quiet town, buzzed on the railing beside him. A single encrypted message had arrived. He carried the phone inside. The cabin was sparse, with just a bed, a small kitchen, and a table. He sat, the glow of the screen illuminating the grim set of his features as he read the brief Commander Vance had sent. It was worse than he had imagined. Michael Thorne wasn't his real name. He had been born Anton Vostok, a low-level enforcer for an Eastern European crime syndicate in the 90s. He had vanished after a brutal internal power struggle, resurfacing in America a decade later with a new identity, a clean slate, and a seemingly endless supply of cash. Aegis Development was a classic money laundering front, using large-scale construction projects to wash dirty money. But it was the sub-briefs that made the muscles in Ethan's jaw tighten. The report detailed a pattern along the Pacific Northwest coast. Small, economically vulnerable towns, waterfront properties, and a sudden influx of development capital. In 2 other towns, business owners who had refused to sell had suffered more than just vandalism. One had a mysterious fire. Another had simply disappeared. The cases were cold, officially unsolved, but the pattern was undeniable. This wasn't just about building a resort. Cedar Grove was a strategic location, its deep water access and isolated coast perfect for smuggling. Thorne wasn't just a developer. He was a predator, and Cedar Grove was his new hunting ground. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was an incoming call from Vance's secure line. Ethan answered. Talk to me, Cole. I've read the brief, Ethan said, his voice flat and cold. This is bigger than a land dispute. Thorne, or Vostok, isn't just washing money. He's setting up a logistics hub. Smuggling. The resort is a cover for a private port. The analysts agree, Vance confirmed. His operation is sophisticated, and he's well insulated. Local law enforcement is either underfunded or, more likely, compromised. The sheriff's department has a budget that doesn't match the town's tax base. Someone's on the payroll. This was the critical point. Ethan couldn't just hand this over to the local authorities. He was on his own, and he was outgunned. "He's escalating," Ethan said, his gaze drifting out the window toward the distant lights of town. "He's made a direct threat against a civilian, Dr. Scott. He's using his son as an attack dog. They're trying to break her, and they won't stop at vandalism. Based on this file, they're capable of much more." There was a long silence on the line. Vance was weighing the options, calculating the risks. This was not a sanctioned theater of war. This was domestic, messy, and far outside their official mandate. "What's your assessment, Ethan?" "The threat is credible and immediate," Ethan stated, the words coming out with the precise certainty of a field report. "Thorne is a ghost with a history of extreme violence. He's established a foothold here, and he will eliminate any obstacle. Dr. Scott is that obstacle. If we wait for the official channels, for the FBI to build a case, it will be too late for her." He let the implication hang in the air. He wasn't asking for permission to act. He was stating a fact. Vance sighed, a sound like gravel shifting. "You know I can't officially sanction an operation on U.S. soil, Ethan." "I'm not asking for a sanctioned op," Ethan countered. "I'm asking for my team. You told me Fana was running a maritime training exercise out of Joint Base Lewis McChord." "They are," Vance admitted, "advanced insertion and extraction drills." "Perfect," Ethan said. "This is a deep water port town, surrounded by dense forest. It's the perfect environment for a final, unscheduled training scenario. A real-world test of their skills." This was the line, the gray area where rules could be bent for the greater good. Vance knew his man. Ethan Cole never asked for help unless it was absolutely necessary. He was the tip of the spear. "Who do you need?" Vance asked, his voice now laced with the quiet authority of a commander who has made his decision. "The whole team," Ethan replied without hesitation. "I need Deacon for signals intelligence. We need to know their communications. I need Jester for breaching. Thorne's properties will be fortified. The rest of the team for surveillance and support." He was talking about the men who were more than his colleagues. They were his brothers. David Deacon Chun, the team's comms and tech wizard. A quiet, slender man whose calm demeanor had mind that could crack any encryption. And Marco Jester Rossi, the breacher, a mountain of a man with an easy grin, who could be laughing one moment and kicking down a reinforced steel door the next. They were the best. "Phantom is currently 3 hours out by fast boat," Vance said. The decision made. They could be off the coast of Cedar Grove by 0300. This will be an unsanctioned, non-official training support mission. You are the on-site advisor. There will be no official record. If this goes sideways, you're all on your own. Do you understand?" Ethan understood. "Commander," Ethan said, the weight on his shoulders not lessening, but now a shared burden. "Tell them to come in dark." Vance said, "The sea wolves are going hunting. They're on their way." The line went dead. Ethan stood. A new energy coursed through him. The waiting was over. The fight was coming. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. He had one more stop to make. He found Maya at the clinic, sweeping the last of the broken glass into a dustpan. Ranger was at her side, a furry, protective shadow. She looked up as he entered, her expression exhausted but resolute. He didn't tell her everything. He didn't tell her about a man named Vostok or about a team of Navy SEALs currently slicing through the dark waters of the Pacific. He just looked at her, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself a small, reassuring smile. "You're not alone in this anymore, Maya," he said. "Help is on the way." A week of deceptive quiet settled over Cedar Grove. The boarded-up window at the clinic was replaced. The hateful graffiti was gone. An uneasy semblance of normality returned. But for Ethan, the peace was a thin veneer over a waiting battlefield. He spent his days in a state of relaxed vigilance, observing the town's rhythms, noting the vehicles that passed the clinic too frequently, the unfamiliar faces at the diner that didn't belong. He was a ghost hiding in plain sight. His team, Phantom, had established a temporary, off-the-books observation post in the dense forest north of town. For now, they were ghosts, gathering intelligence, waiting for Thorne to make the next move. He made it on a Tuesday. It began not with a threat, but with a plea for help. A pristine black sedan pulled up the clinic, and a woman rushed in, cradling a small, shivering cat in a blanket. She was a picture of distressed elegance. Eleanor Hayes, as she introduced herself, was in her late 40s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and eyes wide with polished anxiety. Her designer clothes were a stark contrast to the rugged, salt-of-the-earth clientele Maya usually served. "Please, Dr. Scott, you have to help her," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "This is Bella. She just collapsed. I'm just passing through town, visiting family, and someone at the cafe said you were the best." Maya, ever professional, immediately took the cat. "Of course. Let's get her inside." Ethan, who had been in the break room, watched the exchange from a distance. Something about the woman felt off. Her distress seemed a little too polished, her words a little too rehearsed. Maya took the cat into the exam room. She determined it was suffering from severe dehydration and possible toxic ingestion. She administered fluids and an anti-nausea medication, explaining every step to the overly grateful Mrs. Hayes. "Oh, thank you, thank you," Eleanor gushed, clutching Maya's arm. "You are a miracle worker. I don't know what I would have done without you. Please send the bill to this address." She handed Maya a card for a P.O. box in a town 3 hours away. She paid in cash, declined a follow-up appointment, and hurried out, leaving the now stable cat in Maya's care for observation. Ethan's internal alarms were ringing loud and clear. It was too clean, too convenient. The second part of the trap was sprung 2 days later. Maya was taking Ranger for a walk along the waterfront, enjoying a rare moment of sunshine. Ethan was trailing a discreet 50-yard behind. As they neared the town's main pier, Bryce Thorne appeared, flanked by 2 of his usual cronies. He strode directly into their path, a smug, challenging smirk on his face. Well, look what we have here," Bryce said loudly, making sure the few other people on the pier could hear. "The town vet and her vicious animal." Maya tightened her grip on Ranger's leash. "Leave us alone, Bryce." Ranger, sensing her tension and recognizing the man who had kicked him, let out a low growl. "See? Unstable," Bryce taunted, taking another step closer, deliberately invading their space. A menace. A dog like that shouldn't be allowed in public. He feigned a stumble, lurching directly toward Maya. It was a classic provocation. Ranger reacted exactly as any protective dog would. He lunged forward, barking fiercely, straining at the leash to place himself between Maya and the threat. He didn't bite. He didn't even make contact. But the display was loud and intimidating. "He's out of control. He tried to attack me," Bryce yelled, scrambling backward dramatically. And just like that, a patrol car that had been parked at the far end of the pier rolled forward, its lights flashing. Out stepped Sheriff Dawes, a large, soft man whose uniform seemed a size too small. His face was a mask of bored authority, but his eyes darted nervously toward Bryce, seeking approval. "Ma'am," Dawes said, his voice a practiced drawl as he approached Maya. "I witnessed that. Your animal just lunged at Mr. Thorne. That's an unprovoked act of aggression." "That's not what happened," Maya protested, her heart sinking. "He threatened us. He stumbled on purpose." Ethan stepped forward, his presence instantly changing the dynamics of the scene. "I saw the whole thing, Sheriff. Mr. Thorne instigated the event. The dog was reacting defensively." Sheriff Dawes barely glanced at Ethan, his gaze dismissive. "I saw what I saw, sir. We've had complaints. This animal is a public safety concern." He turned back to Maya, pulling a folded document from his pocket. "Dr. Scott, you are hereby served. This is a lawsuit filed by Mr. Michael Thorne on behalf of his son, and a temporary injunction. You are to keep this animal muzzled in public and confined to your property at all other times, pending a court hearing to have it declared a dangerous animal." Maya stared at the papers in disbelief. Her hands shook as she took them. This was a nightmare. When she returned to the clinic, shell-shocked, the final blow was waiting for her. A certified letter from the Oregon State Veterinary Medical Board lay on her desk. Her hands still trembling, she tore it open. It was a formal notice of investigation into a claim of gross professional malpractice. The complainant was Eleanor Hayes. She claimed that Maya's treatment had not only failed but had resulted in the death of her beloved cat, Bella, just hours after she left the clinic. She was accusing Maya of negligence and demanding the immediate suspension of her license. It was a perfectly coordinated, two-pronged attack designed to dismantle her life piece by piece. They weren't just trying to take her property anymore. They were trying to take her career, her reputation, and her best friend. She sank into her chair, the letter falling from her grasp. The weight of it all finally crushed her. Ethan entered quietly behind her. He picked up the letter, read it, his expression hardening into granite. He placed it on the desk next to the lawsuit. "It's a frame-up, Maya," he said softly. "A pincer movement. They hit you from two directions at once, hoping you'll break." "How can I fight this?" she whispered, her voice raw with despair. "It's her word against mine. It's the sheriff's word against mine. They'll take Ranger away from me. They'll take my license." Ethan knelt in front of her, forcing her to meet his gaze. The calm in his eyes was a steady anchor in her storm of fear. "No, they won't," he said with absolute certainty, "because they made mistakes. The woman, Eleanor Hayes, used a P.O. box and paid in cash because she doesn't want to be traced. Bryce and the sheriff staged their little scene, but they didn't know they had a second witness. We're not going to defend. We're going to attack." He pulled out his satellite phone. "My friends are already here. Now they have a job to do." He dialed. "Deacon, I have 2 new targets for you. A woman named Eleanor Hayes. Find her. I want to know everything about her. And Sheriff Dawes, I want to know who butters his bread. Time to turn over some rocks." The storm had been threatening for days finally arrived, hitting the Oregon coast with the force of a battering ram. Rain came down in near horizontal sheets and the wind howled, turning the sea into a chaotic frenzy of gray and white. It was the kind of weather that sent sensible people indoors. For Ethan Cole and his team, it was perfect cover. Ethan drove his nondescript rental truck along a slick, winding coastal road, the wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. Beside him, Maya sat quietly, her hands clasped in her lap. In the back, Ranger lay on a pile of blankets, a solid, reassuring presence. They were headed for a place not found on any tourist map, the old, derelict North Point cannery, a skeleton of rust and broken windows clinging to a remote stretch of coastline. "Are you sure about this?" Maya asked, her voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "It's the safest place to meet," Ethan said, his eyes fixed on the treacherous road. "No one's been out here in years. It's the last place anyone would look for us." He turned onto a muddy, overgrown track. The cannery emerged in the fog and rain like a ghost ship run aground, its corrugated metal walls streaked with rust. He parked the truck behind a crumbling seawall, out of sight from a main road. As they ran through the rain toward a side entrance, the door creaked open before they reached it. A massive figure filled the doorway. Marco Jester, Rossi was built like the reinforced doors he was famous for breaking. His broad shoulders and thick arms were a testament to his role as the team's breacher, but his face, framed by a thick black beard, was split by a wide, welcoming grin. "Boss, document getting out of this mess," he boomed, his voice a cheerful rumble. He gave Ranger an appreciative pat. "And this must be our VIP. Good boy." Inside, the cavernous space was a maze of shadows and decaying machinery. But in a dry, sectioned-off office, a different world existed. 2 men were at work, the glow of their laptops and electronic equipment casting an eerie blue light on their faces. David Deacon Chin was a stark contrast to Jester, slender and wiry. He sat hunched over a bank of monitors, his fingers flying across a keyboard. His focus was so absolute it was as if the storm, the decaying building, and even their arrival didn't exist. He was the team's digital ghost. The third man, Liam Spector Gallagher, was the team's sniper and overwatch. Lean and patient, with pale blue eyes that seemed to see everything, he was cleaning a long-range rifle with meticulous care. He acknowledged their entry with a short, sharp nod, his movements economical and precise. "Report," Ethan said, shaking the rain from his jacket. Deacon spun his chair around, his screen showing a complex web of information. "Targets confirmed and analyzed," he said, his voice clipped and efficient. Eleanor Hayes is a professional con artist. Real name is Irina Petrova. She has a long history as a corporate courier, specializing in creating legal and social distractions. She's been on Michael Thorne's payroll for the last 5 years. He clicked a key and a new file appeared. Sheriff Dawes. Financials show a series of anonymous cash deposits into an offshore account starting 6 months ago. The deposits match the timeline of Aegis Development's major acquisitions. He's not just corrupt, he's wholly owned. Maya listened, a cold knot of validation, and fear tightening in her stomach. Everything she had suspected was true. It gets better, Deacon continued. I piggybacked a trace on Thorne's encrypted communications. He's not just laundering money. He's moving product. A secure speaker on the table crackled to life. Define product, Deacon. The voice of Commander Vance cut through, clear and authoritative, patched in from a command center hundreds of miles away. Chemicals used to make illegal drugs. Commander, Deacon answered, high grade. A major shipment is scheduled to arrive tomorrow night under the cover of this storm. It's coming in on a repurposed fishing trawler called the Sea Serpent. It will offload at the Aegis construction site, disguised as a late-night delivery of building materials. This was it. The smoking gun. This is our one shot. Vance's voice filled the room. We catch him with a shipment, and we can dismantle his entire U.S. operation. Ethan, you're on the ground. What's the plan? All eyes turned to Ethan. He walked over to a large, dusty table and unrolled a satellite map of construction site. Thorne will be overconfident, Ethan began, his finger tracing the perimeter. He thinks he owns the law here, and he's using the storm as cover. He'll have his own security, but they'll be focused on the water, watching for the Coast Guard, not for an attack from the land. He looked at Maya. Maya, you know this site better than any map. What are we not seeing? Maya stepped forward, her initial intimidation giving way to a steely focus. She was no longer just a victim. She was part of the team. The main access road will be guarded, she said, pointing. But here, this is an old drainage culvert. It runs from the woods right under the perimeter fence and comes out behind the main warehouse they're building. It's not on any of the new construction plans. My dad and I used to explore it as a kid. It'll be muddy tight, but it's a blind spot. A slow grin spread across Jester's face. A blind spot. I love it. Perfect, Ethan said, a look of respect in his eyes. That's our infiltration point. He laid out the plan, his voice calm and precise. It's a 2-phase operation. Phase 1. Spectre. You'll take up an overwatch position on a ridge, overlooking the site. You are our eyes and ears. Jester, you and the rest of the team will handle the perimeter guards. Silent takedowns. No alarms. Deacon, you will be our digital overwatch, jamming their comms and looping their security feeds the second we move in. He then looked at his men, his gaze hard as steel. Phase 2. I will lead a 2-man team through the culvert. We hit the warehouse directly during the offload. We secure the evidence and the primary target, Michael Thorne. We catch him red-handed. This mission is unsanctioned. Vance's voice reminded them all. Capture and contain is the objective. You are ghosts. You secure the evidence, neutralize the threat, and hand over the package to federal assets I will have on standby miles away. You are not to be seen. Understood? Understood, Ethan said. The plan was set. It was simple, audacious, and incredibly dangerous. As the team began their final preparations, Ethan walked over to Maya. The storm raged outside, but inside the crumbling walls of the old cannery, there was a quiet, determined calm. You did good, Maya, he said. That culvert? That's the key. Just be careful, she whispered, her eyes full of fear she was trying hard to conceal. All of you. He handed her a small, rugged radio. Keep this with you. Jester and 2 others will be staying here with you, and Ranger. This place is secure. If anything happens, if anything at all feels wrong, you use this. We'll hear you. She took it, her fingers brushing against his. In that brief touch, an unspoken promise was made. This was for more than just a mission. It was for the quiet town they now fought to protect, for the clinic her father had built, and for the future they both hoped to see when the storm finally broke. The world outside the Aegis construction site had dissolved into a maelstrom of wind and water. Rain hammered against the corrugated metal of the half-finished warehouse, a deafening drumbeat that served as the perfect soundtrack for the ghosts moving through the darkness. On the ridge overlooking the compound, Liam Spector Gallagher was a statue carved from a night. Wrapped in a ghillie suit, he was all but invisible. Through his powerful scope, he was the Operation Silent God, watching every move below. "Spectre is in position," he murmured into his throat mic. "I have eyes on 5 perimeter guards. All sloppy, more concerned with the rain than their sectors." Miles away, David Deacon Chen's fingers danced across his keyboard. "Digital Overwatch is green. Their comms are ours. Security cameras are on a clean loop. As far as their monitors are concerned, it's just another rainy night. You are invisible. Go, Phantom." At the edge of the forest, Marco Jester Rossi gave a thumbs up to his 2-man team. They melted into the shadows, moving with brutal, silent grace. There were no gunshots, only the soft thuds of suppressed air pistols and the heavy slumps of bodies being dragged out of sight. In under 3 minutes, the perimeter was neutralized. Ethan stood at the mouth of the drainage culvert Maya had described, the stench of damp earth and decay thick in the air. Beside him, another SEAL, a young breacher named Rook, checked his gear. "You ready for this?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "Born in the mud, boss." Rook grinned. They plunged into the oppressive darkness. It was a tight squeeze, the cold, muddy water soaking through their gear. The only sounds were their ragged breaths and the scraping of equipment against concrete. It felt like being buried alive. Just as they neared the exit grate, Ethan's comms crackled with a voice he didn't want to hear. It was Jester, his tone stripped of its usual cheer, replaced by tense urgency. "Jester to Ghost, we have a problem. The safe house is compromised." Ethan froze, his hand raised to halt Rook. "Report. A Thorn patrol vehicle stumbled on our truck. They didn't see us, but they're sweeping the area. This position is burned. I'm evacuating the doctor and our VIP now. Moving to secondary extraction point." A cold dread washed over Ethan. The plan had just fractured. Maya was in motion, out in the storm. "What's your route?" "Following the old logging trail north. It skirts the western edge of your target site. Asterisk too close. Far too close. Asterisk understood. Stay dark. We are proceeding with the primary objective. Ghost out." He pushed the grate. It lifted with a low groan, opening into the heart of the enemy's camp. They emerged behind the skeletal frame of the main warehouse, shielded by stacks of building materials. The scene was exactly as predicted. The fishing trawler Sea Serpent was moored at the temporary dock, its engines rumbling under the harsh glare of floodlights. Crewmen were offloading large, unmarked crates. And there, under a canvas awning, was Michael Thorne, a portrait of calm, corporate evil. Beside him stood a tall, imposing figure in a long black coat. Michael, Anton Vostok's former Spetsnaz enforcer. The real threat. The final crate was being lowered when Ethan heard it. A faint sound almost lost in the storm. A dog's bark. His head snapped toward the western fence line. Jester's evacuation had gone wrong. Navigating the muddy trail in the dark, they had been spotted. Michael, sensing the disturbance, had left Thorne's side to intercept. Ethan saw the confrontation unfold from 200 yards away. Jester was trying to pull Maya back into the trees, but it was too late. Michael emerged from the shadows, a pistol in his hand, his movements fluid and deadly. "The woman!" Thorne shouted from the dock, realizing what was happening. "Get me the woman!" Michael lunged, ignoring Jester, his target the civilian. But he hadn't accounted for the VIP. Ranger, who had been held back, exploded into action. With a roar of pure protective fury, he launched himself through the air. He was not a pet. He was a guardian. He hit Michael in the chest with the force of a freight train, his jaws snapping, driving the bigger man backward. The shot from Michael's pistol went wild, cracking harmlessly into the night. For Ethan, time compressed. The mission, the evidence, Thorne, it all became secondary. There was only Maya and the threat. "Engage!" he roared into the comms. It was a signal for chaos. Spectre's rifle cracked from the ridge, taking out a guard near the crane. Jester and his team opened fire from the tree line. Rook laid down a hail of suppressing fire toward the men on the dock. But Ethan was already moving. He sprinted across the open, muddy ground, his weapon up, his focus absolute. He saw Michael throw the snarling dog off him, raising his pistol for a second, clearer shot at Maya. Ethan didn't need to aim. He fired twice from the hip, a perfectly executed double tap. 2 rounds hit Michael's center mass, staggering him. The third found his head. The enforcer dropped like a stone. He reached Maya's side, grabbing her arm and pulling her and Ranger behind the cover of a large earth mover. "Are you okay?" He yelled over the gunfire. "Yes," she gasped, her eyes wide with terror and adrenaline, her hand buried in Ranger's fur. The firefight was short and brutally one-sided. Thorne's hired guns were no match for a team of Navy SEALs. Within 60 seconds, the surviving security men had their hands in the air. Ethan left Maya with Jester and advanced on the dock. Michael Thorne stood frozen amidst a controlled pandemonium, his escape route gone, his best man lying dead in the mud. The look on his face was not fear, but sheer, utter disbelief. He had controlled this town, this coast. He had been untouched. Ethan stopped 10 feet from him, his rifle leveled at Thorne's chest. The storm raged around them, but in the space between the two men, there was a dead, cold calm. "It's over, Vostok," Ethan said. The name hit Thorne like a physical blow. The Empire had fallen. The ghost had been caught. The storm broke just before dawn. The wind died to a whisper, and the rain softened into a gentle, cleansing drizzle. As the first light touched the horizon, it revealed a world washed clean. At the construction site, the chaos of the night had been replaced by a cold, quiet efficiency. The members of Phantom Team had already melted back into the shadows, leaving behind Thorne's men, bound and secured. Before the first fishing boats had left the harbor, a fleet of unmarked black vehicles arrived. Federal agents took control of the scene. Michael Thorne, his face a mask of stone-cold fury, was placed in the back of one of them. His reign was over. By the time the sun had fully risen, Cedar Grove was stirring, waking up to a reshaped reality. The construction site was cordoned off with yellow tape. Sheriff Dawes was in federal custody. At the diner, the buzz was a mixture of fear, disbelief, and liberation. Ethan and Maya stood on wet sand, the tide pulling gently at their boots. The sea was calm now, its surface like hammered silver. Ranger chased the retreating waves, a joyful, boundless explosion of energy. The dog was free. So were they. Ethan's satellite phone rang. It was Vance. Ghost report. "Package is delivered," Ethan said. "Federal assets have controlled the scene and the primary target. The package is extensive." "I've seen the initial manifest," Vance said. "You and your team just decapitated a major international smuggling route." The brass is pleased. In a completely unofficial, unrecorded way, there was a rare hint of dry humor. "Your 30-day leave has been extended indefinitely. Take as much time as you need." "That's an order." It was the highest praise he could give. "Understood, Commander. Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just try to stay out of trouble." The line went dead. Ethan slipped the phone into his pocket. He was a soldier on indefinite leave, a man without a mission. For the first time, it felt like peace. He turned to Maya. The exhaustion was still on her face, but her eyes were clear of fear, filled with a quiet, profound gratitude. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now," he said, "you get your life back." He explained how the federal case made every lawsuit meaningless. Her license was safe. Her home was safe. Ranger was safe. "And what about you?" she asked, her voice catching slightly. He looked out at the ocean, at the endless horizon. He had been a ghost, a weapon honed for a singular purpose. But here, he had found something he hadn't known he was searching for. "Maybe it can," he said, turning to meet her gaze. "Commander's orders would take as much time as I need." A slow, brilliant smile spread across Maya's face. She didn't need to ask what he meant. She could see it in his eyes. He wasn't leaving. He was home. He reached out and took her hand, their fingers lacing together naturally. Ranger, sensing the shift, trotted back to them, nudging his head between them, and looking up with happy, intelligent eyes. Together, the three of them began to walk down the beach, away from the wreckage of the past, and toward the promise of the morning sun.